Many people come to me seeking therapy, reporting more or less the same situation. They often know what their problem is. They know what needs to change, how they should change, and what they need to do to achieve the long-awaited results, whether in their professional, romantic, family, or personal life. But for some reason, they can't move, can't take the first step. They know what needs to be done, but they don't do it, only to later drown in the anguish caused by this paralysis. It seems this sensation is caused by a gap between intention and behavior. You set the goal, understand the step-by-step process, even feel genuine enthusiasm, but when the moment arrives, it's as if the energy evaporates. This is because, in fact, there is a gigantic abyss between these two components. A lot of information gets lost on the path between thought and action. But in what way does it get lost? In our daily lives, it can happen in various ways. We can be brilliant at organizing everything, planning workouts, studying spreadsheets, buying materials, and creating mind maps. But when it comes time to execute what we've planned, we remember to tidy our desk or respond to a message, or we simply content ourselves with just the idea without needing to put it into practice. This anguish of not doing is rarely a behavioral problem. Perhaps it's not your ADHD or your lack of discipline. This not doing can almost always be a doing something else that protects you from a perceived risk. Well, if I don't start, then I don't fail. If I delay, then I can justify the result with the short time frame. If I wait for the ideal moment, then I keep intact the fantasy that when I finally start, it will be as perfect as possible. All of these are unconscious processes that block your action. Indeed, this is what we call secondary gains. They are hidden benefits that make inaction valuable to the psyche. These benefits serve the function of preserving self-esteem, avoiding shame, and maintaining current identity without threats. And it's in this scenario that a defense mechanism called rationalization emerges. It constructs plausible narratives that relieve the guilt of that not doing, while simultaneously defending our inertia. Rationalization can appear in mental phrases like, "I only function under pressure," "Routine kills my talent," "Without the right tool, it's not worth it," "First I need to study everything about the subject," "I function differently," "If I really wanted to, I would do it," "No time, no money," and so on. These thoughts may even have a grain of truth, but they are often used out of context. The ego prefers to have a beautiful reason rather than endure a difficult emotion. To give a theoretical foundation to all this feeling of powerlessness in the face of what needs to be done is described by psychologist Carl Rogers as incongruence. Incongruence is the exact inadequacy between real experience and the conditioned image of who you should be to deserve value. If your real experience, which can be what you're feeling, wanting, or enduring at the moment, is fear, insecurity, or shame, but the conditioned image is to be perfect in everything you do, never fail, or be well regarded by others, you will push yourself more and more toward an unattainable place. And for fear of not corresponding to this conditioned image, you decide not to act consciously or unconsciously, thus rationalizing things. Incongruence creates a constant noise between the body and thoughts. The organism, which is what Carl Rogers calls an individual's total experience, sends legitimate signals of anxiety to our body before we expose ourselves to some situation. For example, in other situations, it may send a signal of real tiredness, or in other cases, a real desire to start something, taking one small step at a time. But given the incongruence between the real experience of these legitimate signals and the thought, the conditioned image we create will call all these signals weakness. The anxiety before exposure will be interpreted as cowardice, tiredness as laziness, and the desire to start small as lack of ambition. Each step then becomes a test of personal worth, and living in permanent testing is living constantly on alert. You postpone things until you feel truly capable of doing them, but the capability you demand never arrives, precisely because it's idealized. So if your plan is rationally perfect but doesn't leave the paper, something is missing. Two things actually, the body and emotion. The mind thinks, but the body decides. It's in the body that decision gains traction. It's in the body where the heartbeats happen, the breathing, the tension, the heat, the butterflies in the stomach. When you ignore these signals and try to convince yourself with logic alone, the ego will then react with more rationalization. But when you include your own feeling, you create a complete circuit that starts from perception, passes through the naming of feelings, which causes emotional regulation by the body, and finally culminates in action. As Carl Rogers writes, the person increasingly discovers that their own organism is trustworthy, that it constitutes an adequate instrument for discovering the most satisfying behavior in each immediate situation. To the extent that this person is open to all their experience, they have access to all available data in the situation. The problem is that nowadays we've learned to see emotions and sensations, like anxiety, boredom, sadness, shame, or tiredness, as character flaws and not as available data for our situations. What good is the so-called armored mind that people talk about so much if you're ignoring the signals from your body, rationalizing and closing yourself off to every feeling and emotion you experience? A person indeed has a performative head that produces impeccable narratives while the body lives in chaos, because the person doesn't know what's happening to them and distances themselves more and more from what would truly move them. If we don't know how to name our emotions and sensations, the road of our motivation will end at planning and won't leave idealization. If we know how to name our emotions more precisely, we'll have more information at our disposal to know why action is paralyzed. Most of us use broad labels that don't guide action, like anxiety and laziness. But if everything is anxiety or laziness, then nothing is anxiety and laziness either. If instead of anxiety, which is very broad, you detect apprehension, which is more local and controlled, this means you should stop and take a deep breath for about 30 to 90 seconds before starting what's making you apprehensive. If it's agitation without a precise focus, this requires you to move and loosen your muscles for about 30 seconds before sitting down and starting your task. In other words, by correctly naming what you're feeling, reason will know what needs to be done to initiate the correct action. Rationalization does the opposite of this. The more coherent the story to postpone or legitimize something that's being avoided, the more distant you become from what you feel. But we can't remain too far from what we feel. And to illustrate this, let's use as an example the greatest rationalizer in world literature, Raskolnikov, the character from Dostoiévski's novel Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov is a poor ex-student from St. Petersburg who elaborates a theory to appease his feelings of misery, fear, and humiliation during life. The theory that there are certain extraordinary men who would have the right to transgress the law in the name of a greater good. It's worth reading his idea in full. Look at what he says. "It's only in my central idea that I believe. It consists precisely in that individuals, by the law of nature, are generally divided into two categories. A lower one, that of the ordinary, that is, so to speak, the material that serves solely to create their fellows, and properly the individuals, that is, those endowed with a gift or talent to speak the new word in their midst. Here the subdivisions are naturally infinite, but the traits that distinguish both categories are quite clear. In general terms, the first category, that is, the material, consists of people who are conservative by nature, correct, who live in obedience and like to be obedient. In my view, they are obliged to be obedient because that is their destiny, and there is decidedly nothing humiliating for them in this. The second category consists of all those who break the law, the destroyers, or inclined to it, judging by their capabilities. The crimes of these individuals are naturally relative and very diverse. For the most part, they demand, in quite varied declarations, the destruction of the present in the name of something better. But if one of them, to realize his idea, needs to step over, even if over a corpse of blood, in my view, he can allow himself internally, in his conscience, to step over the blood. However, according to the idea and its dimensions, observe this. So, to test his idea and relieve his feelings of misery, he murders an old usurer and accidentally her half-sister, who are people he didn't consider important to others or to society. Note here the entire psychic design of Raskolnikov. He elevates the argument to a height where emotion cannot reach. The old usurer ceases to be a person and becomes a symbol. The act ceases to be a crime and becomes an experiment. This is how rationalization operates. It dehumanizes the object and anesthetizes the subject to legitimize some dissatisfaction. After the crime, the reason that convinced Raskolnikov begins to collapse. Logic no longer accounts for reality. He has fever, delirium, and panic attacks. He lives between pride and guilt and begins to oscillate between confession and escape. Raskolnikov's rationalization had its secondary gains at first, that is, by self-proclaiming himself as extraordinary. He protects the self-esteem wounded by misery and academic failure. By transforming the victim into a social parasite, he authorizes himself to act without compassion. By calling the murder a philosophical test, he distances himself from the violence itself. All of this to avoid coming into contact with his feelings of insignificance and powerlessness before the world. But after some time, emotions can no longer be repressed, and they return overwhelmingly. Then, in the midst of his collapse, Sonia appears, a young prostitute, humble and compassionate, who becomes Raskolnikov's moral and effective counterpoint. It is she who encourages him to admit his crime and accept responsibility for his acts. And after long resistances, Raskolnikov confesses his crime and is sentenced to forced labor in Siberia. Sonia represents the possibility of redemption through truth, love, and accepted suffering. Raskolnikov doesn't find peace when he explains himself better, but he only changes when he ceases the war against emotion. After the crime, logic no longer accounts for reality, and the symbolic gesture that unites body and thought, heart and head, is when Raskolnikov, at Sonia's suggestion, kneels in a square and kisses the ground. It's here that Raskolnikov descends from the pedestal of his rationalization and visits the ordinary world he so despised, but which is also the world of action and contact with the community and the body. In analytical psychology, one could say that Raskolnikov is pure logos, the universal component of reason and word. Sonia is eros, the universal component of bonding, compassion, and care. A logos without eros becomes cold and rationalizing, but on the other hand, an eros without logos becomes sentimental and hysterical. Both complement each other. Wisdom without love runs the enormous risk of becoming tyranny. In other words, we need this erotic component in our lives, which reintroduces sensitivity and integrates these two opposites. In the end, the way back goes through the body, through the reality of the other, and through an act you can execute in the here and now. Rationalization usually uses beautiful words precisely so you don't feel the squeeze of beginning. Therefore, something that can be done is to bring the body into the equation. So, before starting a task, for example, close your eyes for 20 seconds and do a quick scan of your body. Focus your attention on the face, jaw, chest, abdomen, hands, and ask yourself, where am I feeling resistance now? If the tension is in the chest, there's probably apprehension. If it's in the jaw, there's a defense. If it's in the stomach, a fear of exposure. If it's in the shoulder, a weight of obligation. And after this scan, apply a specific physical micro-adjustment. That is, relax your jaw, stretch your chest, breathe a bit longer, and only then execute the task that's bringing you resistance in small steps and without thinking too much about the result. Emotion is not the enemy of discipline. The problem isn't feeling too much. It's feeling without proper guidance. Emotions have their useful messages. Anger, for example, can tell you that perhaps you're crossing certain limits. If channeled, anger can then become assertiveness to cut unimportant tasks. Frustration can inform you that the challenge is above your current level. So, if the difficulty is adjusted, you return to your flow. Shame can alert you to a fear of exclusion, but if recognized, you can calibrate your exposure. If we don't come into contact with and face these emotions, all that remains is rationalization. But then comes the question you must be asking yourself. How will I manage to correctly name my emotions? You can keep an emotion journal or thought journal. In it, you'll write in your own words the definition of each emotion you know. Updating it over time, you can describe emotions by making analogies with things or situations, telling a story, or simply defining them. To expand your vocabulary even further, literature will be very important. Literature books are an extremely rich source for finding ways to better understand each emotion. Any novel by Jane Austen, Dostoiévski, Machado de Assis, among others, will offer you various different descriptions, and you can copy them into your emotion journal. In the end, reason orders feelings, and balanced and properly named emotion conducts action in its right measure. If you're paralyzed by your thoughts, perhaps it's because a Sonia is missing in your life, but she doesn't need to be found outside. Sonia is also Sophia, the divine and intuitive wisdom that lives within us. She is Don Quixote's Dulcinea, Dante's Beatrice, Theseus's Ariadne, and Ulysses's Penelope. In other words, it's that life drive that gives us courage and leads us to practice. She is within you. You just need to pay attention. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to comment about it. Until next time.